Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The warmth of the bathroom was comforting, steam curling lazily around the edges of the mirror as I ran the towel through my damp hair. My fingers combed through the strands, the mirror reflecting the curve of my neck, the softness of my shoulders. Everything was quiet, the world muted except for the faint hum of running water and my own steady breathing. Then, a sudden shift, a presence behind me. I hadn't expected it. My spine tingled as if electricity had danced along it. There was a pause, that delicate moment where silence stretches taut, and I felt the brush of a hand too close to be innocent. My breath caught. The reflection in the mirror betrayed him before I even turned, those eyes locked with mine, sharp and playful, carrying a daring I wasn't sure I was ready for. A small, teasing smirk curved his lips, and something in me shifted, my heartbeat picking up pace. I could feel it in my chest, thumping like a drum, quick and insistent, echoing in my ears. He leaned just enough to brush against me, a closeness that sent shivers down my back, and the air seemed to thicken between us. Every subtle movement became a language, a tilt of the head, a gaze that lingered a second too long, fingers grazing where they shouldn't, a breath hot against my skin. The mirror made it impossible to hide, the shared look in that reflection said everything words never could. I shivered, half from nervousness, half from anticipation. It was electric, a quiet tension that hummed in the room, a teasing promise suspended in the space between heartbeats. My hand paused mid-motion, towel dangling, because I realized I wasn't alone, and yet every instinct whispered I wasn't entirely unwilling. And then, just when the air was thickest with possibility, something shifted, a movement, a sudden closeness. My pulse thundered, my senses flared, and the mirror reflected an intimacy I wasn't prepared for. His eyes held mine, unblinking, daring, and for a fraction of a second, the world outside disappeared. The mirror reflected more than just the physical, it held the silent conversation of desire, tension, and unspoken curiosity. And in that moment, nothing else existed but the two of us, frozen in anticipation, the question lingering, what happens next? Ever since he had moved in a few months ago, our dynamic had been quietly shifting in ways I hadn't anticipated. At first, it was small gestures, the way he lingered near the kitchen when I made tea, the subtle way his gaze followed me across the living room, almost shy but undeniably attentive. I'd catch myself smiling at nothing, feeling a flutter I hadn't experienced in years. And yet, beneath that, there was a tangle of guilt, confusion, and curiosity that I couldn't quite untangle. Our relationship had always been layered. Outwardly, it was ordinary, casual conversation, shared meals, occasional laughter. But behind the easy facade, there were cracks, little fissures that hinted at the things we didn't say aloud. He carried a quiet yearning in his eyes, and I carried the memory of a life too long contained by rules and restraint. Sometimes, in the soft quiet of the evening, I'd catch him staring at me, not in a way that felt inappropriate, but in a way that pierced through my carefully maintained composure, exposing a vulnerability that mirrored my own. It was in these small, unscripted moments that the tension simmered, almost painfully sweet. A brush of hands while passing by in the hallway, a shared smile over a private joke, the way our laughter overlapped and hung in the air longer than necessary, all of it fed a current that neither of us fully acknowledged but both felt. My heart would race at the tiniest contact, my chest tightening with a mix of thrill and fear. He noticed, too. I could see it in the fleeting hesitations, the half-smiles, the way his fingers sometimes lingered on the edge of mine just a second too long. And yet, there were things unspoken, truths I didn't dare voice, boundaries we hadn't defined. I sensed his curiosity, his longing, mirrored in the reflection of our shared moments. Each glance carried questions neither of us had asked aloud. Every touch, though brief, sent shivers across the surface of our carefully guarded restraint. It was a delicate dance of closeness and distance, desire and hesitation, that left the air between us almost electric. I often wondered if he sensed the same restlessness I felt, the yearning for something forbidden, something dangerous, something we shouldn't explore yet couldn't resist. And when he brushed past me, just close enough to feel the warmth of his presence, or when our eyes met over the edge of a shared task, the tension tightened, making it impossible to ignore. We were walking a line neither of us had drawn, feeling the thrill of the unspoken, the dangerous intimacy of almost touching, almost knowing. The room seemed smaller when he was near, the air heavier, the mirror reflecting not just our faces but the silent conversation of desire and curiosity. And in that suspended space, I realized, whatever was coming, it was more than fleeting attraction, it was a moment that would change everything. The evening was quiet, but the tension in the air was anything but. I had been arranging books on the shelf, my movements deliberate, when I felt him lingering nearby, watching. I could sense it, an intensity in his gaze that made my skin tingle. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the spines of the novels, but the small, almost imperceptible brush of his hand against mine as he passed by made my pulse spike. Jealousy prickled unexpectedly in me, a strange mix of irritation and intrigue. He had been talking to a friend earlier, laughing in a way that made me want to pull him closer, to claim the attention that felt almost too easy to notice. I shook my head, chastising myself for feeling possessive over someone so young, someone who should only see me as, well, what? Yet the way he looked at me now, with that sharp curiosity mirrored in the reflection of the nearby window, suggested he felt the same magnetic pull I did. I turned, pretending to adjust a cushion, and caught him watching me, the corner of his mouth twitching in a subtle, knowing smile. That smile, so casual yet daring, made my chest tighten, and I found myself holding my breath. A playful tension hummed between us, silent but charged, each waiting for the other to make a move, to cross a line we both knew existed. Every gesture became a word in an unspoken conversation. The way his fingers hovered near mine as he moved past, the fleeting brush of his shoulder against my back, the way his eyes flickered toward the curve of my neck, all of it was a push and pull I couldn't resist. Desire mixed with guilt, longing with hesitation, creating a deliciously dangerous tension that filled the room. And yet, neither of us spoke. We both knew that acknowledging it outright could shatter the delicate balance, but the temptation was undeniable. It was a tightrope act, a step too far, and the world could tilt, a pause, and the moment would pass, but neither of us wanted it to end. In that suspended space, with our reflections mirrored in the window and the quiet hum of the night outside, it felt as if everything had been leading to this charged instant. The question hung between us, who would give in first, and what would happen when the unspoken could no longer be ignored. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboards and distant hum of the refrigerator feel amplified. I had thought I was alone, but then I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind me. My heart skipped, a sharp, delicious stab of anticipation running through me. He was here. Closer than usual. Too close to ignore. We found ourselves in the kitchen, the dim evening light painting everything in warm amber tones. He leaned against the counter, casually relaxed, or so he wanted me to think, but the intensity in his eyes betrayed the calm. I could feel it, the magnetic pull, the silent promise lingering in the air between us. Every subtle movement of his body seemed directed toward me, every glance a daring question I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Our proximity made my skin sensitive to every brush of air, every slight movement. When I reached for a glass, his hand almost touched mine, the closeness electric. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the quick thump of my heartbeat, but it only grew louder. The tension was palpable, thickening around us like a tangible force, daring us both to acknowledge it. A laugh escaped him, a soft, teasing sound that made my chest tighten, and I caught the way his eyes lingered on mine in the reflection of the stainless steel appliances. There was a charged silence in that space, a moment where words seemed unnecessary, where every second stretched taut with desire, hesitation, and curiosity. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, but fear and longing tangled in my throat. Then, without warning, he stepped closer. The air shifted, charged with a current neither of us could ignore. My pulse thundered in my ears. Our reflections in the counter's polished surface mirrored the closeness, the silent conversation of yearning that neither of us dared voice. For a fraction of a second, the world narrowed to just him and me, the space between us impossibly small, impossibly intimate. And then, just as I felt my resolve teeter, the door creaked behind us, a reminder that the world beyond this charged moment still existed. Our eyes locked one last time in the reflection, and the question remained, hanging heavier than ever: would we cross the line, or would the silence hold us back? The night had deepened, and the house seemed to shrink around us, the quiet amplified by the weight of what had been unsaid. I had thought I knew him, thought I understood the subtle glances, the playful teasing, but the truth had a way of shattering assumptions. I can't hide it anymore, he said suddenly, his voice low and trembling, yet charged with intensity. My heart skipped a beat. I turned toward him, caught in the amber glow of the hallway light, eyes wide, waiting for the words I sensed were coming. I've wanted this for longer than I realized, he admitted, the honesty raw and unexpected. It wasn't a casual flirtation or a passing curiosity anymore. His confession sent a shockwave through me, a mixture of thrill and fear twisting in my chest. The air between us thickened, charged with longing and vulnerability, the kind of intimacy that comes not from touch but from the bare truth laid open. I wanted to step back, to retreat to safety, but my body betrayed me. I was drawn to him, pulled by the gravity of his words, the weight of his gaze. I could feel every heartbeat, every quickened inhale, as if our hearts were suddenly the only sounds in the room. And then the twist, a message pinged softly on his phone, the screen illuminating a text that made my chest tighten. It wasn't what I expected. Someone else was involved, someone he hadn't mentioned, someone from his past who had complicated everything. My mind raced, torn between the intensity of the moment and the shock of betrayal. My pulse thundered, not with excitement this time, but with tension, confusion, and the raw sting of reality crashing in. He saw my expression, saw the mix of curiosity, hurt, and desire flickering across my face. I didn't mean for it to be like this, he whispered, voice quivering. But I can't deny how I feel for you. His eyes pleaded, reflecting the honesty and risk of the moment. We stood there, mere inches apart, the world outside forgotten, trapped in a dangerous, magnetic closeness. Every thought collided with another, desire, fear, suspicion, hope. The attraction between us was undeniable, but the twist made it precarious, uncertain, and impossible to ignore. The night held its breath as we faced each other, hearts racing, eyes locked, every second stretched taut with suspense. And in that suspended instant, one question lingered in the charged air: would we let the revelation drive us apart, or would it pull us even closer? The air in the living room was thick with tension, each breath weighted with the aftermath of truths laid bare. The confession, the unexpected twist, the revelation of a hidden past, it had all come crashing down like a storm, leaving nothing untouched. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of frustration, fear, and undeniable longing surging through me. I can't believe you didn't tell me, I said, voice shaking, but not with anger, more with the vulnerability of someone who had been blindsided. He looked at me, guilt and resolve fighting for dominance in his expression. I wanted to. I didn't know how, he admitted. But every time I tried to, I froze. And then tonight. I couldn't. I had to tell you the truth. The honesty, raw and unfiltered, struck me like a wave. I wanted to run, to protect myself from the risk of being hurt, but there was something magnetic about his presence, something that made stepping away impossible. My mind spun with the knowledge that our connection had been more than curiosity, more than tension, it had been something real, something dangerous in its intensity. We moved closer, the air around us vibrating with unresolved energy. The brush of his hand against mine was brief, tentative, yet it sent a jolt straight to my core. Words felt unnecessary here, the emotions between us spoke louder than anything we could say. My heart pounded, and I realized just how precarious the line was that we were balancing on, between fear and desire, betrayal and trust. And then came the confrontation with the past. The text on his phone, the shadow of another presence, was no longer a barrier but a mirror reflecting his honesty. He explained, fully and openly, about the complicated history that had followed him into our moment, about choices made and mistakes owned. I listened, anger and empathy colliding, my chest rising and falling as the suspense of the night threatened to overwhelm me. Yet in the raw honesty, I felt the first cracks of relief. The tension, though still thick, began to shift into understanding. The storm hadn't passed entirely, but we were both standing, facing the consequences of our feelings, and for the first time, it felt like we might navigate this together. We didn't speak for a long moment, just stared at each other, hearts racing, breaths mingling. The room seemed smaller, warmer, intimate, not because of closeness alone but because of the truth finally laid bare. The cliffhanger hung not in danger but in possibility. Would this night, fraught with revelations and choices, be the beginning of something we couldn't yet name? The tension of the night had finally softened, leaving behind a quiet warmth that neither of us had expected. The confessions, the revelations, and the emotional storms had cleared the air, and what remained was something fragile yet undeniable, a bond forged in honesty, vulnerability, and mutual longing. We stood across the living room, the dim amber light wrapping us in a cocoon of intimacy and calm. His eyes searched mine, and I saw the same mix of hope and nervous anticipation reflected there. No words were needed, everything had been said in the storms before, and now only action remained. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he stepped closer. I could feel the space between us shrink with every heartbeat, our unspoken connection pulling us together like a current neither of us could resist. I reached out, and his hand met mine, fingers interlacing naturally as if they had always belonged together. The simple touch spoke volumes, trust, affection, and the promise of something lasting. A smile spread across his face, tentative yet genuine, and I found myself smiling back, relief and happiness flooding through me. It was a small, perfect moment, full of the weight of all we had been through and the promise of all we could still become. "Are you really okay with this?" he asked softly, voice tinged with uncertainty but full of warmth. "I am," I replied, heart full, emotions raw yet steady. "Because I trust you. Because I want this, with you." And just like that, the air seemed lighter, as if the house itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this reconciliation. We didn't need grand gestures, just the quiet closeness of being together, of finally letting our hearts lead instead of hesitation or fear. He pulled me gently into a hug, one that felt like home, like a safe harbor after the storm. I rested my head on his shoulder, letting the warmth of the moment sink into my bones. The world outside might still be complicated, but here, in this quiet space, we had each other, and that was enough. We stayed that way for a long while, letting the silence speak, letting our hearts sink in rhythm and relief. The night had brought turbulence, truth, and tension, but it had also brought clarity and connection. In the reflection of the polished surfaces and the soft glow of the lamps, I saw not just ourselves, but the start of a bond that could weather anything. And in that moment, with his hand in mine and our hearts aligned, I knew that this was more than attraction, it was the beginning of something enduring, tender, and undeniably ours.